Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Chenza Kachadi, and I am the Family Engagement Coordinator at Kinnar Child and Family Services. Welcome to this evening's Family Education Series, Autism and Mental Health, Understanding the Overlap. Our Family Education Series is intended to build upon your strengths and capacity as caregivers to identify, understand, and respond to childhood and adolescent mental health issues. In tonight's session, you will learn about what autism is and the overlap between autism and mental health disorders like anxiety, depression, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and obsessive compulsive disorder. We will identify what symptoms to look for and when you should seek out support and additional resources. And our presenters will share strategies and resources for you tonight to better support your own child. We have a few housekeeping issues to share before we get started today. All of our participant phone lines are muted and cameras are turned off to ensure a clear connection throughout the presentation. We've set aside time at the end of the presentation to answer any questions that you might have. And feel free to ask questions in the Q&A feature throughout the presentation. So we do have time at the end of the presentation to answer all questions and concerns that you might have. Please note, we can only respond to general information questions relating to today's presentation, and unfortunately, we cannot provide individual advice, but if you generalize the question, I'm sure we can work around that. We'll try to respond to as many questions as we can get. And like I said, please feel free to put your questions in throughout the presentation. At the end of the meeting, we will launch a poll to collect your feedback on our session. If you could be kind enough to complete that for us. If you're having any technical difficulties, please use the Q&A feature to report them. Our IT whiz, Jay, is behind the scenes making sure to support us with all our tech issues. And we will launch a poll now, Jay, if you have that ready, to identify who our audience is. And again, we'll launch another poll at the end of our session. I would like to welcome our presenters, Chantal McGlynn and Carla Danziger. Chantal and Carla are registered social workers, both with a master's degree in social work. They both specialize in mental health services for children and youth with autism. And we were just having a conversation before we went live that this is what they do all day, every day. So they were experts in this field for sure. They are mental health consultants at Kinnar with our urgent response services program. They provide consultation to a multidisciplinary team. They conduct assessments to those with high-risk behaviors, and they establish responsive interventions using evidence-based therapeutic modalities tailored to meet the unique needs of each individual client and their families. So I'm going to turn it over to you and enjoy the presentation this evening.
Thanks, Chenza. Appreciate it. Nice to see so many people here this evening. Thanks for joining us. So we'll jump into the presentation and we'll take some Q&As at the end, like Chenza mentioned. Before we begin, we just kind of wanted to talk about two main notes to keep in mind when talking and going through this presentation. So of course, we're here to talk about autism. And throughout this presentation, we will be switching between person first language, so like a person saying person with autism, and some identifying first language, so such as autistic person. Throughout the presentation, you may notice we're going to switch as much as possible between both, and this is stemming from our previous experience in interaction with when working with clients and families, to just be inclusive of how people want to be called and how they want to be addressed. If you're working with a clinician and you have a preference or your child has a preference, it's really important to let them know so that they can tailor their language to the best of their abilities. The second thing we want to note is there have been a very large movement within the autism community to move away from disordered terminology. So while we use the term ASD to refer to the diagnostic terminology used, it's what people may be familiar with, and it's also kind of highlighting that really shift in thinking that's happened recently. Autism means something different to everyone. I think a lot of us can say we're probably here because we know someone or love someone with autism and we want to help. In this presentation, we're going to talk about what is autism? What does it look like? How it presents at different ages, red flags, and when to investigate. We're really going to highlight the overlap between autism and mental health. And at the end, we're going to talk about some interventions, some resources for parents and caregivers, strategies, and we're going to send you off with a couple external resources, websites, books, and videos to help you leave with some concrete options. So like I mentioned before, autism spectrum disorder, ASD, is a diagnostic. It's something you can be diagnosed with. We are moving, like I mentioned, towards less disordered language. So historically, how autism has been referred has really changed over time. If you know someone a little bit older, maybe a teenager or an adult with autism, it may be a different term than their diagnosis. So one of the most common ones is Asperger's, which actually doesn't exist anymore. And it's all kind of now under the larger ASD umbrella. So what is ASD? ASD is a neurodevelopmental condition that impacts the way the brain functions, which can cause social, communication, and behavioral challenges. So we will also be switching between saying the full word, the full diagnostic name, which is autism spectrum disorder, and ASD. The term spectrum is used to highlight the wide variety and variability that an individual with autism can have. It can be very different on how they experience things socially, behaviorally, and communication. For example, some individuals with autism can be really, really active, always need to be moving, while others might like to be relaxed, cool, calm, and on the couch. Some individuals with ASD may be really sensitive to things like bright lights, loud sounds, smells, taste, and the way certain things feel, and some might not be affected by that. Another example is some individuals with ASD might have really short attention span, while others may be able to maintain their attention for a long period of time. So now we're going to talk a little bit about prevalence rates in autism. When we refer to prevalence rates, we are talking about what proportion of the population has the condition at a certain point in time. So it's the number of cases divided by the population at that given time. So in Canada, and this was done in 2019, about 1 in 50, which is around 2% of Canadian children between the ages of 1 and 17 were diagnosed with ASD. Autism spectrum disorder is reported to occur in all racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic groups, and is around 4 times more likely to be diagnosed in boys than girls. So, like Chenza said, Chantal and I do this. We breathe this, we talk about this every day. And one of the most common questions we get is, why are the prevalence rates increasing? Why do so many kids, adults, and individuals in our society have autism? And people are right. The prevalence rates have increased significantly in a really short period of time. And there are a couple of reasons why we can attribute this. So we have better analytic tools. We have better ways of examining what's going on. There's better identification and screening methods done by doctors and extended health teams. Like I mentioned at the beginning, there's also been some changes in the diagnostic criteria. So the ASD diagnosis is based on criteria established in the DSM manual, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Any changes in the diagnostic criteria can have a great effect on children with ASD and their families, which we'll talk about more in the DSM further on into this presentation. Another reason why prevalence rates could be increasing is because there's more access to it. There's more availability for our clinicians and our families to receive services. Or it could, as well, it could be that there's just more cultural acceptance of the diagnosis and increased scientific awareness around ASD. So I was just talking about the DSM-5, and within the DSM-5, ASD is diagnosed as a single spectrum disorder with a set of criteria describing challenges in the area of the two things we have on our screen here. So one, social communication, and two, restricted and repetitive behaviors. Within the DSM, there's also 3 levels of autism. So the first level is the individual requires some support. The second level is this individual may require substantial support. And level 3 is an individual that requires very substantial support. So we are going to take a deep dive and look further into these 2 characteristics. So the first one, like I mentioned, social communication. In this domain, we have kind of 3 topics, 3 things we're going to talk about. The first one is deficits in social emotional reciprocity. So what is this? This is things such as not being able to have a conversation or maintain a conversation, have that back and forth. Or maybe they're not able to initiate or respond to social interaction or understand that, we're going to have that back and forth. I'm going to say something and then wait and take my turn and let someone reply. The second one is deficits in nonverbal communication behavior used for social interaction. This is things such as not being able to understand body language. For example, not knowing that when someone rolls their eyes, meaning that they disapprove or dislike what's being said. The third one is deficits in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. This is things such as difficulties adjusting to behavior to suit various social contexts, difficulties in things like imaginary play, making friends, or maybe not having interest in having peers or playing with them. When we take a look at the second domain, we are talking about restricted and repetitive behaviors. So we have 4 things we're going to talk about in this area. The first one being stereotyped or repetitive motor movements, use of objects, or speech. This is things such as lining up toys, maybe flipping them over and looking at the bottom. Things like echolalia, where the child repeats noises or phrases maybe they heard 1 or 2 times, from parents, or maybe a TV show or YouTube video that they really like watching. The second one is insisting on sameness, not really being flexible to adhere to new or different routines, or ritualized patterns of verbal or nonverbal behavior. These can be things like making sure that routines are the same, taking the same way to school every day, knowing that they get up at the same time and go to bed at the same time every day. This could also be like insisting things are done a certain way. Maybe food's cut up a certain way or on a certain colored plate. The third one is highly restricted, fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity or focus. So these are things like a really strong preoccupation with objects, and maybe unusual objects, highly focused on certain objects or certain topics as well. The last one in this category is a hyper or hypo activity to sensory input or unusual interest in sensory aspects of the environment. So this could be really noticing the difference when the weather changes to pain and temperature, or maybe on the other side, not really liking certain smells or them being strong smells that they can't stand. Not liking certain fabrics or textures. Maybe they have a fascination with lights or movements. It's important to note, so the next couple slides, we're going to do a deep dive into some signs and symptoms you can notice between 2 different age groups, toddlers and young children, as well as youth and adolescents. When we talk about these things, they are just things that have been studied, things that are really common for individuals with autism. If you know someone with autism, or if you're lucky enough, like Chantel and I, to have and to know many people with autism, no two people with autism are alike. So just because one thing happens for one individual doesn't necessarily mean it can happen or is seen in another individual. But let's take a look at some red flags, which Chantel will talk about later on in our presentation as well, but things to look out for. So we have this broken down into two main concepts. We have social communication signs and behavioral signs. So when we think about social communication signs, individuals that are around the toddler years, young children, typically do not use eye contact to get someone's attention. They're rarely pointing to objects, holding them up to show people. And when their name is being called, they respond inconsistently. They also have an inconsistent use most of the time of certain gestures. They're not really copying their caregiver's actions or their peers' actions. And we see an inconsistency in social smiles. So maybe not smiling at the right time or having a really flat affect. Sometimes they don't show interest in what other children are doing, such as things like peekaboo, maybe not initiating it or engaging in pretend play with other individuals. Sometimes they have a speech or language delay, so they may not babble or they may not understand simple language or instructions. On the right side, we have some behavioral signs we look out for, which is repetitive behavior, which I mentioned on the last slide, is things like spinning wheels. So, there's a car, a plastic car toy, maybe they're flipping it over and spinning the wheels repetitively, lining up their toys, turning the lights in and off, on and off, opening and closing the door repetitively. These individuals can also be upset by change or prefer routines. They could have repetitive movements in daily tasks like walking on their tippy toes, jumping up and down, rocking back and forth, or flapping their hands. We also, like I mentioned last time with this age group, sometimes see some sensory sensitivities or sensory interests. So really liking water play, or maybe not liking it at all. Noticing that they have a tag that is itching them, and so they can't wear that sweater. So now we're going to take a look at a little bit of an older age group. So we're talking about kind of older children into those teenage years. We have the slide broken down into the same two domains that we mentioned, that we've been talking about now for the last 15, 20 minutes, is social communication signs on the left. So conversations, what does this look like for our older children and teenagers? This is things like talking a lot or a really long time about their special interests, something they love doing, taking things quite literally, not understanding sarcasm, maybe having a different tone of voice, speaking in a really high-pitched voice or a lower affect voice. Or maybe they use really formal responses or language. Sometimes these individuals have difficulty reading nonverbal cues, so things like body language. We are a human species. We are very receptive to body language, and this is something that's really difficult for these individuals. They can use less eye contact, show fewer emotions on the face, and use less gestures. And sometimes they want to be alone. They don't want to be with other people. They want to play by their rules, not the rules made up or changed by other individuals. This age group, we sometimes see difficulty making friends, understanding those kind of unwritten social rules of friendship. They can have a really hard time adjusting to behavior in different social situations. And when we think about the behavioral signs, we mentioned these, right? Having a really big special interest in something, wanting to talk about it at any time they can, research it, go to the library, take books out about it. They can be upset by changes in their routine, things that are out of norm for them. We can still see at this age group that repetitive body movement or noises, repetitive noises as well. We can see sometimes an increase in compulsive behavior, so having to do things a certain amount of times, for example. And with our older children, as well as teenagers, like our toddlers and young children, they have sensory sensitivities, or sometimes they seek out sensory stimulation, hugs, deep squeezes, things like that. So now we're going to talk a little bit about masking. And before I start talking about masking, this is a relatively new concept. And there's not a lot of research on it, but it's a concept that if you're familiar in the autism community, it's been around for quite a while. And the definition of masking is it involves hiding or not showing aspects of oneself in order to pass as atypical and pass as typical and to not seem socially different from their peers or other individuals. So what does this look like? This can look like copying other people's actions, gestures, postures, facial expressions, and tone of voice. Some individuals suppress their stimming or self-regulation behaviors, so they can bottle it up and they hold it in until they get home. We see this very often with kiddos who go to school, keeping it all in, keeping it bottled up in their body, coming home to their safe place and really letting it go. As you can imagine, that can be exhausting for individuals with or without autism. And in turn, it can lead to mental health challenges, including and not limited to things such as anxiety and depression.
Okay, thanks, Carla. So now that we've kind of gotten a really good overview of what is the autism diagnosis, what does this mean, what am I kind of looking out for if I think that my child might have autism, or if you have a child with autism, a lot of those things will probably sound very familiar. We wanted to start to shift to really what we're all here to talk about today, which is what is this overlap that we're seeing between autism and mental health, and how do I know when I might need to seek some additional support for my kiddo? So what we do know is that children with autism are at a higher risk of health-related challenges, and this does include mental health-related disorders. About 70% of children with autism also have a mental health disorder, and some of the most common ones are anxiety, depression, and ADHD. Within this 70% kind of group, there is about 40 to 50% of people that actually meet criteria for 2 or more mental health disorders. Because what we're seeing is that there is such a big overlap between symptoms for mental health and autism, this can lead to misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed disorders, because often, like I said, the symptoms can kind of look similar and they might get misattributed to one another. So a good example of this is depression. It may go undiagnosed because we're looking at an individual that has autism, we're seeing flat facial expressions, a flat tone of voice, and less expressions of joy and more of that flat affect. And we might just assume that this is related to their autism profile, which in reality, it could be related to mental health, and it can also go the other way. So it can be misdiagnosed because we're seeing all of these same things, and we assume that it has to be related to depression, but it may actually be normal for their autism profile in their day-to-day lives. This can make it really challenging to know what is going to be the best support for you and your family. And when your child is experiencing mental health challenges, it can be more challenging to access those supports that you're looking for. For misdiagnoses, we're not really 100% sure why this is occurring. It could be related to a lack of appropriate assessment tools, and it also could be related to a lack of training in the professional realm around autism and mental health. We don't have a clear picture yet, but we definitely are seeing more of an understanding around how both of these can exist in the field. So when we're kind of talking to parents, we've said this many times, this is our world that we live in. And so we do this a lot with parents. Part of our job is really assessing whether or not there needs to be a mental health component kind of assessed. And so the things that we really ask parents and ask you to look at and kind of keep track of are some of these questions that we have listed on the screen here. The first one really is like, what is supposed to be developmentally appropriate for my kiddo at this age? Am I seeing behaviors that are different than that, or something that I wouldn't be expecting? What is considered consistent with my child's autism profile? Like Carla said, when you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And so the type of characteristics and symptomology that you see is very different in a huge wide variety. And so you know your child best. Are you starting to see some behaviors that seem to be a little bit different than their baseline or their normal? Have there been life or situational changes that could be contributing to the change in their behavior? Has there been really big life events? Has there been a move? Has there been a change to the family structure? Has there been a death in their life? All of these pieces can really impact the way that our kiddos are engaging in the world around them. And the last one there is, are there behaviors or moods that go beyond what you would expect? And so we often will ask parents to kind of pay attention to their baseline, their child's baseline behaviors, and really what that means. And you'll hear me refer back to this 100 times in the next part of this presentation. What that means is, what am I used to seeing? What's average and normal for my kiddo? And what types of behaviors and moods am I seeing that is different and that I'm not used to seeing? And so really keeping track of those pieces. So there are lots of different things that can be impacting our kiddos' moods and behaviors and can be related to the changes that we're seeing. So we always kind of like to check in on some of these other pieces as well when we're trying to identify whether it's mental health, whether it's autism, or it could be both, or it might be something else unrelated. So the first really important one is our health-related factors. So it's always really important for us to kind of take a look at, could there be something physical going on that could be impacting the way that my child is behaving? And so it's always a good idea to reach out to your family doctor or your pediatrician and have them go in for a medical exam so that we can start to rule out some of those pieces. And really keeping track of monitoring any changes in their sleep, in their eating patterns, their level of physical activity, or any types of changes or shifts in the medications that they might be taking. The second one is educational learning factors. We know that our kiddos spend most of their life in school, especially when they're young. And so this can be a really big environment for them where challenges can arise. And so we want to be considering things like learning challenges. Is there an undiagnosed learning disorder or something else going on that could be impacting my kiddo as the expectations are increasing as they get older? Is there something in the classroom environment that feels really hard for them? Like Carla has mentioned, our kids have lots of sensory challenges, and the classroom environment, if you've been in one recently, or probably the same when you were in school, it's hectic, it's loud, there's bright lights going on. Half the time kids are flicking lights on and off. It's a lot of chaos. And so that can be really hard if all those sensory pieces are already a little challenging for you to manage. And the last one here is environmental changes. Has there been something new and big that's changed and that might be impacting the way that they're able to transition and the way that they're kind of engaging with the world around them? This can be small things. It can also be big things that are obvious. So changing to a new school, changing your home, moving to a new country, but it also can be small changes in the environment. So are the lights different? Are the sounds different? Are the smells different? I'm often surprised by some of the little things that really impact our kids, like changing around their bedroom or something like that really can have an impact. So keeping an eye on some of those things as well. So this kind of leads us to, okay, great, I've looked at all of these pieces and I am keeping track of that, but I'm really still leaning towards not knowing what could be affecting the change that I'm seeing in my child. That kind of leads us to some examples of behaviors that we may see that could be attributed to autism or mental health or both. And it's really important to be aware if you are seeing an increase in frequency, intensity, and duration of some of these behaviors above and beyond their typical baseline, that we're keeping track of what that looks like. So you'll see on the screen here some of the common ones that we see. So avoiding novelty and uncertainty, withdrawing from social situations, resisting change in their routine, being irritable and explosive, increasing the restricted and repetitive behaviors that they're typically engaging in. General body complaints. Are they talking about their stomach hurting, their head hurting, just like generally their body feeling achy and sore, and really paying attention to any type of abnormal sleep patterns. I think especially at this age, when we're looking at teenagers and younger, it's really shocking how much changes in the sleep can tell us about what might be going on for them. So if we're starting to move closer towards feeling like there is a mental health piece that's going on here, we want to watch out for some of the red flags that really tell us, hey, I think I need some extra support around mental health. The first one here is changes to sleep and energy level. I feel like a broken record talking about sleep at this point, but it's very important. So keeping an eye out for those things, we might be wanting to engage some support around mental health. Are there worries that they're having that are actually starting to interfere with their daily life and their daily activities of living and that weren't there before? Are they avoiding those activities or the people that they really used to enjoy and they used to have no challenge with kind of accessing? Has there been an unexplained change to their grades? Are they not doing as well in school? Are they starting to avoid going to school? Or are you seeing an escalation in their behaviors around their school avoidance? So they're becoming quite dysregulated when you're trying to kind of get them out the door to school. Are we seeing an increased amount of dysregulation just throughout the day? Is there more crying, meltdowns, irritability, withdrawal? And then really, really important are kind of the next two on the slide here, which is, are we seeing expressions of feelings of guilt, hopelessness, worthlessness, or any type of statements about suicidal ideation, which is thoughts about not wanting to be alive anymore, about wanting to harm themselves, about wanting to kill themselves? Or are you seeing any type of self-harming behaviors or thoughts? They're expressing thoughts about wanting to self-harm. It is really important when we see any of these types of symptoms that we do take safety first, and that is our most important first step before we move to any additional support. There are lots of things that you can do to support your kiddos if these things come up, but really what we want you to know is that if you are noticing that your child or someone around you seems more sad regularly, you're hearing some of these expressions of the hopelessness, of the worthlessness, it is important to ask whether or not they are thinking about suicide or thinking about wanting to harm themselves. And you got to be prepared for the answer as well. And so some things that you can do if they do say that, yes, they are experiencing those thoughts, is reaching out to your local emergency services. So if you're in a space where you feel as though your child is really unsafe and you're not sure how to keep them safe through the actions that they're doing or the statements that they're making, you can call 911, especially in the York and Simcoe area. There are a lot of police services now that use mental health social workers that come along with them, or mental health programs, or have training in mental health that can attend the home as well. And so we always recommend that you kind of flag for them when you're making that call that it is a mental health related emergency. Additionally, if you don't feel like someone needs to come to your home and help you, you can also visit your local emergency room. If you're feeling like you can't keep your kiddo safe or you're really concerned, that can be really helpful. The hospitals are really great to be supporting our kids. Additionally, there are community support crisis lines that you can access. In York, it's 310 COPE. And in kind of the Barrie and Simcoe area, we use the Kinnerk crisis line. Additionally, a new piece that's been added is the national crisis line. So 988 can be really helpful if you're really concerned and you're not sure what to do. We always recommend reaching out to some of these services that can give you some additional direction. Or if you have a child that's old enough, encouraging them to reach out through Kids Help Phone or through 988 or something like that. It's really important that we take these things seriously, even if we don't really think they mean it or we're not really sure what it means. We want our kids to know that they're heard and that we hear that they're hurting and that we're going to respond effectively to supporting them through it. And you can reach out to your community support mental health people. Carla and I work for URS. You can reach out to any of your public mental health support agencies like Kinnerk, York Hills, New Path. Anyone in that realm can offer you some additional support when you're not in a crisis. And then the last one, which seems kind of less important after that spiel that I gave you, is the changes to hygiene and self-care. If you're starting to notice that they're not showering, they're not really taking care of themselves like they used to, or there's more resistance to some of those things, they don't want to shower, they don't want to brush their teeth, there's could be a mental health piece going on here that you want to investigate further and seek some further support. So this is all well and good, but why does it matter? And so what we do know is that we see more success when we are preventative with mental health. And so when some of these things are coming up, it's really helpful if we can be preventative and proactive for our kiddos so that we're really setting them up for success. When we look at kind of untreated mental health or behavioral challenges that persist into adulthood, we can see some impacts on their lives. We see decreased quality of life, challenges with accessing education, housing, jobs, difficulty with adaptive functioning, negative impacts on their relationships and ability to form and maintain relationships, increased psychiatric and emergency room visits and hospitalizations, and involvement with the justice system. So we just want to be proactive. Some examples of some co-occurring mental health conditions that we see with autism most frequently, and you've already heard us mention these a couple of times, but there are some additional ones up here too, is under the anxiety umbrella. So that could be generalized anxiety. It could also be OCD or obsessive compulsive disorder or social anxiety. We also see attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADHD, depression, eating disorders, intellectual disabilities, language and speech delays, motor difficulties, or sleep difficulties. Like I've said before, it can be challenging to know what behaviors you're seeing are connected to. Is it mental health? Is it autism? Is it both? Because often what we see happen is that these symptoms can actually exacerbate one another. And Carla's going to walk us through some really great examples of how this can happen.
Thank you. Okay, so like Chantel mentioned, now we're going to talk about two kind of concrete examples that are really going to highlight the difference as well as the similarities between mental health and autism. Again, really going to highlight the similarities and how much they can really overlap. So we're going to begin with feelings of anxiety. So anxiety is adaptive. All of us have it, and it can actually be a really good, helpful thing. Anxiety alerts us that something important, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought, something that is important to us. It can provide us motivation as well as protective factors. Something like checking both ways before we cross the street and not stepping out if we see a car is our flight or fight response, keeping us safe majority of the time. However, it's when anxiety becomes overwhelming and interferes with our daily life, it can be really detrimental for anyone. Different factors can contribute to anxiety. So in our picture here, we have feelings of anxiety in the middle, and we have a bunch of things on the outside. So these are all the different factors that can contribute to anxiety. These can be things like our environment, situations, or even personal factors. It's when, like I mentioned, it interferes and impacts our daily life and our day-to-day functioning that we really start to bring attention to it and say, there may be something else going on here. So let's take a look at some of the examples we have kind of on the outer circles, the smaller outer circles. So people's experiences like trauma, or maybe having a communication barrier, speaking a different language, or not understanding what someone is trying to tell you. Or for a lot of us, a new situation, being put maybe in a room of people we've never met before, or we don't know and not familiar with, can make us feel anxious. We might feel shy when this happens, and these can be really normal things. When we take it one step further and relate it back to how ASD and anxiety's symptoms can overlap and look similar, we see kind of on the right side of our circle, things like rigid thinking, difficulty with transitions, social challenges, friendship challenges, being really overwhelmed by our sensory environment, maybe really bright lights, loud noises, or a lot of people. And there are a lot of reasons why someone may experience anxiety. Of course, we don't have them all on this slide, but these are some of the examples of how there are a lot of prevalences of symptoms and of reasons why an individual might have feelings of anxiety. And a lot of them overlap with autism. The second example we're going to talk about is a behavior that you might see in your child with autism or even yourself. And it can be attributed to, again, a lot of different factors. So let's take the example of difficulty with focusing. While we can all have difficulty with focusing, it can be related to things like autism, having ADHD, or maybe having a learning disability. As well, we know that people with autism and depression or mental health concerns also struggle to focus on topics or on things they're trying to complete. A lot of individuals that have difficulty focusing might be tired. Chantal spoke a lot about the importance of sleep. If we're feeling really tired or fatigued and we didn't get a good night's sleep, it can be really hard for us to focus on what's going on. Maybe we're hungry. Maybe we didn't eat lunch or a well-balanced breakfast. Again, we think about things like trauma, having a trauma history, and how our experiences can really influence how we think and focus on topics. And again, what this does is really highlight how interconnected everything can be, how attention difficulties can look a lot like things individuals with autism already struggle with, and they can be intertwined and overlap. We also see things like a hyperfixation, challenges with remaining on just one task, moving on quickly, or challenges with recalling information, maybe that we just told an individual. So what these two examples really show is, again, how interconnected and how hard it can be for you to tease out, hey, is this autism or ADHD? Or is this autism or a mental health concern? Or is it both? So when we think about these two examples and we relate them back to individuals with ASD, of course, individuals with ASD have mental health challenges, just like their non-autistic counterparts. How feelings are communicated may look a little bit different for individuals with autism. They may have different tones of voice, different facial expressions, body language, or social communication styles, like we mentioned before. But some of the challenges autistic individuals face in a predominantly non-autistic environment can contribute to an increased feeling of distress. So on our example here, we have the circle with kind of the arrow pointing around and around and around. And what it's representing here is the positive feedback loop. And this means when the product of a reaction leads to an increase of that reaction. So this means that A produces more of B, which in turn produces more of A. And it's that kind of feedback loop, continual circle. So when we think about an individual with autism, we talked about how something like rejection and bullying, or challenges with communicating with peers or other individuals, their social skills, them not being able to talk about something that's really preferred to them, like a preferred topic or interest, having an adverse sensory experience, or something like rigid thinking, can be, of course, is, as we mentioned, an autism-related stressor. And in turn, when they are not able to engage, for example, let's say talking about their preferred topic, it can increase a negative mood. It really doesn't make them feel so great. And then in turn, it increases their autism and mental health symptoms. This can be things like maybe an increase in stimming. We see some more hand flapping and some self-regulation. We then see rejection from their peers. And then at the bottom, we see the increase of negative mood. And you can see there how it's really easy for an individual with autism to get stuck in this feedback loop where A leads to B, leads to C, and it continues going around and around. And it can be really difficult to help break that. Chantel, I'm going to pass it back to you so you can talk about kind of some specific interventions and therapeutic supports.
Thank you. Sorry, when I tell you, my mouse, every time I click it, it keeps wanting to roll back to the other slide. So I apologize for the chaos that's ensuing. I don't know what's going on. All of a sudden, my computer's glitching. Story of my life. Anyways, so we're going to talk about types of interventions and therapeutic supports that you can actually access. Now that we have a pretty good understanding of how it's so murky and there is this real gray zone around understanding, is it autism? Is it mental health? Is it both? Is it none of those things? There are a lot of different interventions and supports that you can access if you do think your child has a mental health related challenge, or if you're really not sure and are looking for some additional support and getting a better sense of what's going on. So the first one, of course, because we're talking about mental health, is mental health interventions. Mental health interventions really aim to address the cognitive pieces around these challenges and symptoms. It focuses on helping individuals to better understand their thinking, learn more positive ways to cope, and better understand why the behaviors exist and why they continue to happen. On the screen there, you'll just see two examples of mental health interventions. They're not the only two, but they're commonly used. So the first one is cognitive behavioral therapy. And this is an evidence-based treatment intervention that really focuses on how our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors are all interconnected and impact one another, and really aims to help people to identify, challenge, and change this cycle. So the understanding is that if I change the way that I think, that will impact the way that I feel, and then in turn will impact the way that I behave. And we can really intervene on any one of those points of the triangle, and we can impact the other two. So that's a really helpful one. On the other hand, we also have dialectical behavior therapy, which is really just a more intensive form of CBT. It focuses on teaching individuals how to cope with stress and develop emotional regulation and relationship skills. And it's typically used for more intensive and more complex behaviors, often related to suicidal ideation or self-harm. Mental health therapy really is important because it can build emotional regulation and capacity skills. It can increase the cognitive insight and awareness into what's going on for them and how they can actually support themselves in those moments. It also supports the development of positive coping strategies, which is really important when we get stuck in that feedback loop. And then it also can provide parents with the skills to support their children in their own emotional regulation, which can be really helpful. However, we are not the only option as mental health providers. There are lots of other professions that can be really helpful for our children with autism and mental health related challenges. The first one is applied behavior analysis. If you've been within the autism community, I'm sure you've heard of this intervention. It's an environmental intervention that really focuses on environmental and behavioral strategies and using and shifting and changing some of those strategies to reduce the emotional distress that we're seeing. On top of that, we also have occupational therapy, also focuses on environmental and behavioral interventions, but OT really has kind of a specialization in understanding sensory needs, assessing sensory needs, and providing strategies and recommendations around how to better meet the sensory needs of our kiddos, which in turn will decrease that emotional dysregulation. And then we have speech language pathology. This really focuses on increasing communication abilities that can often reduce behavior challenges that are due to an inability to effectively communicate their needs or wants. So a lot of the time, our kiddos struggle to express how they're actually feeling or what they need, And understandably, this can lead to an increase in their emotional dysregulation and an increase in challenging behaviors. So SLP really works to build those communication strategies to help to be able to better and effectively communicate with the people around them, what they need. It can also support with building social skills and giving opportunities to our kiddos to really practice and build on those social communication strategies out in their environment, which is really great. And SLP can also be really helpful. Well, all three of these actually can be really helpful for supporting our kiddos that don't communicate through verbal language, because they're able to utilize whatever communication tool works best for the individual, and meeting their needs in that way, and by providing that environmental and behavioral intervention. So outside of the kind of professionals that you can access that can support you and your family, there is also recommendations that we have just kind of generally for parents at home that can be easily implemented into the home environment. The first one is coping skills. So modeling positive coping skills for your kiddos can be really, really helpful in increasing their ability to regulate on their own. So there are just some examples up here that we often will recommend. Things like deep breathing, visualization, and progressive muscle relaxation all kind of fall under that mindfulness umbrella and can be really easily accessed through just a simple Google search. There's tons of videos on YouTube that you can watch, especially if you have younger children. They love the YouTube videos. There's lots of worksheets that you can access. And one of my favorite website is Go Noodle. It's often used in the schools, but they have tons of different videos for progressive muscle relaxation, for body movement breaks, and for deep breathing and breathing shapes that you can access. On the right here is just an example of what one of those deep breathing exercises can look like. And again, is easily accessible just by a Google search. Additionally, on top of those things, we recommend, distracting with pleasurable activities, things that that they enjoy and that they like to do. Really using the self-soothing activities that you already know that your kiddos enjoy, and really encouraging and prompting them to do those when you're noticing they're starting to get dysregulated. And the positive self-talk, which really goes nicely with validation. So working together with your child to increase their ability to speak positively about themselves, but also using validating language and positive talk from yourself directed towards your child to encourage them to engage in some of these other skills. Another really big piece that we recommend at home is really teaching your child about their emotions. So children with autism might have a more difficult time understanding and developing the skills to kind of navigate their big and strong emotions. And so it is really important that we do kind of support them additionally with some of these pieces. So up on the screen there are just 3 examples of some of the things that we might recommend. On the far left is a feelings thermometer. And I think I can vouch for both Carla and I when I say we use these all the time in therapy. So this can easily be added into the home environment. You can ask your child, oh, how mad were you feeling today? Can you rate it on the scale for me? 0 being not at all, and 10 being really, really, really angry. And just kind of helping them to understand what the different sensations they're feeling might look like and what strong emotions they could be experiencing. Helps them to be more aware and helps them to notice when they're starting to escalate up the scale and they might need to use a coping strategy. Additionally, we want to give them the emotional language. So helping them to actually accurately label and identify their emotions goes hand in hand with our feelings thermometer, but talking to your kids about the different types of emotions and then using it with your modeling by kind of labeling and expressing your own emotions to help them to understand what being sad actually looks like, or what being mad or happy might look like. So an example of this is, you're planning to go out for dinner as a family, really explicitly saying to your child, I am so excited to go out for dinner because we'll get to spend time together. So really labeling those emotions. Or something happens and you have a bad day. I'm feeling really sad right now because X, Y, and Z. So at an age appropriate level, but really explicitly labeling your own emotions to help your kiddos put kind of the pieces together for their own experiences. And then on the far right side is an example of another thing that we sometimes use in sessions, and it's kind of like the gingerbread person. And so it's helping us to explain to kiddos and helping kiddos to connect the sensations inside of their body to the emotion that they might be experiencing. And this is important because when we're young, we might not actually know the words or understand what's going on, but we do know what it feels like inside of our body. And so when we start to feel our heart racing or our stomach feel upset or we're clenching our fists, it can be helpful for kiddos to have these types of clues to help them to identify what they're actually experiencing and then how they can support themselves, which is using those coping strategies that we talked about.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about what you can do and specific resources and supports. So if you suspect, sorry, Chantal, next slide. Thank you. If you suspect that your child may have autism, it's important to talk with your family doctor or pediatrician, as well as your child's school team to see if they've noticed any of the red flags that Chantal spoke about in detail earlier. As well as their treatment team. Maybe they already have an SLP or an OT or other service providers and speaking with them. You can be asked to be referred to a diagnostic hub, and these are usually in your county. So I know we're virtual tonight, so a lot of people coming from different places. I think I saw someone's name from Vancouver in their name. So I'm not going to give any specific examples just because we're all kind of scattered today. But there are a lot of diagnostic hubs in like York and Simcoe region, as well as throughout our whole province as well. And it's important for you as a parent, if you suspect your child has autism, to seek out an assessment from a qualified professional. And again, this can be done through family physicians, pediatricians, developmental pediatricians, or psychiatrists, as well as psychologists, if that is part of your child's extended healthcare team. And as a parent, there are a couple things we suggest you can do to help prepare you for everything moving forward. When you have an appointment booked with any professionals, it's really important to come prepared. You're going to have to answer lots and lots of questions, and it can be extremely overwhelming. So we always suggest for our parents to, first of all, come prepared with all the info you can think of. Have examples of the behaviors you observe. The more detailed, the better. Think about the baseline, like Chantal said, how it used to be, maybe comparing it to the behaviors that are happening now and what you've noticed. Talk about the changes of the previous behaviors. So what is outside like the usual and the norm for your child? Write your concerns down. Smartphones are really great in the sense that if you don't have a pen and paper, you can write them down in notes. You can record a voice memo and listen to it at a later time or play it for your professional in the meeting. We also always suggest to bring a supportive family member or a friend with you. Again, this can be extremely overwhelming and a lot for you to handle. So having someone there that can help support you through this as well. We always like to send you off with a couple concrete examples, and I'm pretty certain that this will also be, it's recorded, so it will be posted at a later time. So these titles can be found. You don't have to write them all down. But these are some of our favorite books for parents related to autism and mental health. So we have a bunch here. And we can confirm if the slides will be sent out. But again, I do know it's being recorded and posted and can be accessed at a later time. A couple resources, again, this will be posted, so don't feel like you need to get them all down right away. But there's a lot of parent education that can be, that is offered through various agencies. For those with older children, Autism Ontario in Carey's Place also has really great programs for our 18+ age group. And then we have some apps, Go Noodle, Mindshift, and Calm are some of our favorites, as well as some relatively local services. We have Canark, of course, Autism Ontario, and Carrie's Place, which are great resources.